Schaefer, a member of the museum board here at the Carnegie Museum. And we have our special guest today, Richard Thompson, who's going to share his collection, and I guess your wife Bonnie, it's her collection too.
Yep.
Of political memorabilia. I'm supposed to be Gene Lubke, but he didn't make it, so I'm pretending to be official here. But anyway, Richard has accumulated just an amazing amount of stuff. Bonnie was sharing the photo album of some of the things that are not here today, and this is just a smattering of some of the stuff they have. So this being an election year and all, we thought this would be very appropriate. So Richard, you got the floor, and knock our socks off. I'm sure you will.
We'll try. Well, I want to thank you for inviting me for the program today. Like Mark said, Gene Lubke was going to introduce me, so I had all this really nice flowery words of praise for him and everything, and it's kind of like, and there's Mark. So, Gene, wherever you are, appreciate you anyway. Before we begin, we have some very special guests that I'd like to introduce. It's not very often that a small town has the former president and current president of the United States with them. And I'd like to have you give a warm welcome to former President George Bush and Barbara Bush and Bill and Hillary Clinton. And after we're done today, I understand that the president will give us some musical entertainment as well. The program today is called From Iowa to the White House, Collecting Presidential Memorabilia. A wide variety of campaign buttons have been devised and used for the purpose of persuading voters to vote for a particular candidate. These have included medals, snuff boxes, bandanas, lanterns, buttons, pamphlets, posters, toys, watch fobs, glassware, pennants, matchbooks, canes, bumper stickers, license plates, novelties, and billboards. Over the years, memorable campaign items and slogans and issues have been immortalized on the campaign objects. Tippecanoe and Tyler 2, Full Dinner Pail, 16-1, My Hat's in the Ring, No Third Term, I Like Ike, AU, H2O, and All the Way with LBJ. I'm sure that there's some of those that you remember. There's really too much about the history of Iowa and the caucuses to go into in this program, but I did pull down from the internet some information about the Iowa caucuses. Suffice it to say that for most people, the Iowa caucuses really became popular and known to the national news media in 1976. And that was when Jimmy Carter decided to run for president. Well, before then, and up through the years until 1968, Iowa had had political conventions and county conventions to decide who went to the they were delegates, whatnot. Well, over the years, the General Assembly changed the rules and the regulations. And in 1916, Iowa had a primary, and everybody hated it. It was really expensive, so they abolished that, and they went back to the caucuses, but nobody knew anything about it. And in 1965, the Iowa Supreme Court and the Iowa General Assembly changed the rules and put in there that for the caucuses, and this was only in 1965, that the meeting places had to be publicized in the newspapers. Up until then, it was pretty quiet. But they made a rule that for the precinct caucuses, notice had to be given twice beforehand in the newspaper where the precinct was going to be held. And in 1968, after the Democratic National Convention, they got together and they changed the rules. And in 1972, George McGovern took advantage of that, came to Iowa, and the news media kind of came here. This is from George McGovern's campaign, where you could become a member of the McGovern Million Member Club. So George McGovern came to Iowa, campaigned against Richard Nixon, and lost in a landslide. But the news media figured something out. When the caucuses were introduced and changed, New Hampshire had always had the primary first in the nation. Well, the Iowa caucuses were designed in such a way where there were 30 days gap between the state convention and the county conventions. And the caucuses had to be held prior to that. So if you start counting backwards from when a state convention is held, and then you have to count backwards 30 days to when the county convention is, or the district convention is being held, and 30 days before that, what happened was in January and February was when the Iowa caucuses would be produced. That wound up being before New Hampshire. So in 1975, when Jimmy Carter was deciding, I want to run for president, and he goes, ooh, New Hampshire is in this month, but Iowa is before that. If I win Iowa, I'm going to get a lot of publicity. So Jimmy Carter came to Iowa in 1975 and 76 and basically lived here. And he crisscrossed the state and everything. Nobody knew who he was. It was just basically him and maybe an aide or something. And Rosalind Carter would come with him. And they practically lived in the state. And lo and behold, he won the Iowa caucuses. And the news media goes, oh, who's Jimmy Carter? And Jimmy Carter went on to win to the White House. One of the political items that we have for Jimmy Carter, of course, Jimmy Carter was a peanut farmer. One of the fun parts about collecting memorabilia and presidents is caricatures. And Jimmy Carter was a peanut farmer, and he liked to smile. So you have a smiling peanut. Of course, sometimes presidents come with a little bit of baggage, and in this case, he had his brother Billy, who liked to drink beer, so they had Billy beer. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the presidency as far as collecting memorabilia, because one, the first president wasn't inaugurated until 1789, George Washington, so there really wasn't much in the way of presidential stuff before then, okay? So if you see anything from like 1770 or something like that is claiming to be a presidential thing, it's like, nah, don't think so. The early presidents did not actively seek votes. They were also elected to office before the development of competitive two-party systems. It is generally agreed upon by collectors that Andrew Jackson's election as president began the desire for collecting. His supporters in 1824 made available coin-type tokens with his images on one side and a slogan like, "The nation's good," on the other side. From then on, such items as silk ribbons, cartoons, posters, ballots, prints, became part of the presidential campaign process. And in 1860, the ferrotype, a tintype photo of the candidate, came into use. Starting in the 1880s, buttons became more popular and are now among the most desired of political campaign items. During the 1880s to 1890s, novelty lapel items with moving parts were very popular, and today they are very valued for collections. A lot of them broke over the years, they were stored improperly, so the ones that remained intact and still work are extremely valuable. Buttons overall remain one of the best known political campaign items that most people collect. Cheap and easy to produce, they can be distributed by the millions by candidates or created for a specific candidate for a specific reason, such as a local visit or a popular issue of the day, thus increasing its collectability. Several years ago, a rare Cox presidential candidate button sold for over $50,000. I don't have one. Before we get into the show and tell of our collection that my wife and I collected, I'd like to tell you a little bit about how to collect memorabilia in the modern day. In the old days, you used to go to flea markets, used to go to antique shows, estate sales. Locally, you'd go to Old Threshers and Watchier Flea Market and places like that. Even when presidential candidates would come around, you might even be able to get a button or some item. That would be nice. The new way is over the internet. And this morning, I went up to the FPAC station and I pulled down some information. This is just one auction site that's available on the internet, of which if you go up and you use a search engine and you put in something along the lines of collecting political memorabilia, the search engines will come up with all kinds of information and you can pick and choose from that. It's all linked together. Well, this is one. It's from biddersedge.com, and I just typed in political. They had matching categories of 161 uncategorized items, 118 Clinton items, 33 FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt sites or items up for auction, 231 Kennedys, 92 Nixon, 92 Reagan, and 7,937 other. So I got looking through other, and I came up with, actually this one's Teddy Roosevelt. And this person, you have a button. Let's say I've got some different buttons down here, and I've got one and I want to sell it. How do you do that? Well, you can't really go to an auctioneer and say, I have one button, might be worth $5 or something. Could I put it on consignment? An auctioneer kind of tells you, maybe, maybe not. The new way is you could take a digital picture of your button or take it up and get it scanned into the computer and put it on the internet on your own little site, such as this person did. And they have a Teddy Roosevelt 1908 political pin. And they put a color picture, front and back of the pin, and their asking price was $100. And this was what was on the auction block this morning. There were 4 days left. They've had 4 bidders, or actually 3 bidders on the one item. So it'll be interesting to go back and see what it was, see how it turns out. But they had a description of the item and all of that. I got looking under other, and there were almost 8,000 items on that. And it's kind of like, well, I didn't have that much time, so I kind of looked to see what might be interesting. And I came up with this. And we're in Iowa. Last August, we had the Iowa straw poll up in Ames. Well, that's a wonderful opportunity if you like collecting things to be able to get buttons and novelty items and the like. Well, this one button company came up with their own set of buttons. And now somebody had bought them, and now they're putting it up on sale. Their minimum bid was, their initial bid was $8.88. I'm not quite sure how I came up with $8.88, but that's what they put as their initial bid. And it's now gone up with 3 other bids for a bid as of this morning of $11. Wow. But anyway, it's a set of 8 Iowa caucus pins with pictures of the different candidates: Elizabeth Dole, Steve Forbes, George Bush, Gary Bauer, can't remember, Alan Keyes, Dan Quayle, Lamar Alexander, and Pat Buchanan. with a little picture of the state of Iowa in there. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But that's kind of the coming way of acquiring political items. In fact, any kind of items. I've got a person that I clean for that collects cow items. And she's on eBay almost every day checking to see what kind of cow collectibles are up there. So there's all kinds of things available. Some of the specific auction sites that are online now are politics.com, campaignbuttons.etc.com, presidentialconnection.com, whitehousechristmas.com, and political.com/buttons. So if anybody would like to go on the internet, you can find all kinds of things. The downside of that is precisely because it is so easy now for a person to sell or trade or buy from another person or to a person. It's a real concern of mine for museums, such as what we're in now, where instead of people leaving items for a museum, they're going to start seeing, oh, we can raise easy cash, we can convert it to money. And it really makes me kind of fear for future generations of kids that somebody will buy something, it'll be really valuable, and it'll get stuck in a safe deposit box. I really believe that up through now, if somebody could go to the different banks and open up all of the safety deposit boxes, you would have a treasure trove of Americana that's in there. Jewelry, collectibles, and everything. And it doesn't see the light of day. And that makes me kind of sad. I'd like to see it go to museums, but simply because the internet, especially now, is much more convenient for people, you're going to be seeing a lot more of trades going back and forth. And the money factor will get in there. The American Political Items Collectors is the best known collecting society for collecting campaign memorabilia and presidential memorabilia. They were formed a number of years ago, and basically they set the rules for buttons and political items as to how they ought to be manufactured to keep them legitimate. One of the problems that they have had over the years is you have some collectors that just want to buy one of everything. They've got to have everything in their collection, which sounds fine, except that somebody could very easily come up with one button. They can make one button about one candidate and raise the price. Say, okay, we want $100 for it. And it might only be worth a few cents. So that kind of thing, the APIC is trying to work hard at working on. Some of the different chapters that they have, the Barry Goldwater chapter, Bush Political Item Collectors, Carter, Political Item Collectors, Cause, Democrats, Republicans, Ford, Roosevelt. In fact, both Roosevelts. We had two Roosevelts as president. Labor History chapter, the Rail Splitter, which would be President Lincoln material, Third Party and Hopeful chapter, the Wendell Willkie Political Items Collectors, and Women's Suffrage and Political Issues chapters. So there's all different kinds of chapters available. Several years ago, one of the ways to acquire items that are actually the best political presidential item that people want is something that a president actually had or used. And that's sort of your dream, to get things like that. Well, presidents since, was it Calvin Coolidge, started sending out White House Christmas cards. And over the years, the other presidents would send out Christmas cards as well to people. And in 1963, the Kennedys were no exception. The creation in the East Room was photographed for the Kennedys' 1963 official presidential card. This is a picture of it here. In mid-November, 500 of them arrived at the White House to be signed by both the President and the First Lady. At their convenience over the next few days, Jacqueline Kennedy signed in blue ink, while John F. Kennedy boldly signed in black ink. By the time President and Mrs. Kennedy departed for their fateful trip to Dallas, a maximum of 30 of the cards bore both their dual signatures. After the President's death, his personal secretary, Evelyn Lincoln, preserved them for posterity. Basically, she forgot all about them. And it wasn't until she died that they came to light. And they weren't located until 1985. And to put it mildly, the political collectors who had the money went absolutely bonkers. I mean, there were so few of them and all that. So there was a lot of bidding, and they went up for auctions and everything, and the prices kind of went through the roof. At some of these different sites, you can get, this is the historical connection that's available. They have one of FDR's canes for sale. This cane is mounted and framed and has a brass plate with information about this particular cane. If you purchase this item, you will also receive a certificate of authenticity. So that's kind of nice. Of course, this one they don't put a price on. Everything that I might be interested in, nobody ever puts a price on. But you can get the JFK U-boat pin with Kennedy emblazoned on the side, tie bars, things like that. You can get a junior staff lapel pin for the White House, and it transcends all administrations, the story goes. And it's only $15, but if you want to get the senior staff lapel pin for White House staff, it's $125. So I'll give you the email address right after this program. You can get it. There are people that enjoy specific candidate or specific presidents, and they've created their own websites. This person enjoyed USS Grant, and they've got their own website and has different pictures of different items that are available for sale or were up for sale, and have different links, to all that. You can get campaign buttons and all kinds of things in there. In 1972, was it J. Doyle DeWitt in Hartford, Connecticut. He worked for, was a Travelers Insurance Company starting in 1927. And he basically was a political collector. He loved history. He was a master at it. And he went around and collected political memorabilia. And this was in Hartford, Connecticut. When he died in 1972, he bequeathed his collection to the University of Hartford. It was a university, they didn't know what to do with it. So basically it sat in storage for about 15 years. And finally, one of the professors of education, who also liked to collect political memorabilia in Americana, found out about the collection, came to understand that it belonged to the university, felt this needs to be on display. One thing led to another. The Board of Trustees went after some grants. They worked at it, and they got, I believe, $6.5 million construction grant to house the museum in the library. And it's gone on where now it's considered to be second to the Smithsonian Institution for a collection of political items. So let me get on to the show and tell. Bonnie and I used to start collecting back in the, I guess actually when we were children. After we got married, we met, and started to go to different political campaigns and things like that, and our collection just kind of grew from there. We always kind of wanted to put things on display somewhere, so we kind of collected with that in mind, but also from personal experiences. So we just went around. So what I've done today is kind of give a little taste of what we have. Back in 1996, we did a display with the Fairfield Art Association at the Fairfield Library and the Iowa State and First National Banks. Now I remember Don Kramer, who was kind of helped put the exhibits together, and he thought we might have a few dozen items or something. He really didn't know. And he showed up to help us, and he was kind of blown away. I mean, they had no idea. We had no idea. So we did all these displays, then we put them in storage up in our closet, and until Gene Lutke asked me to do this program, we hadn't really looked at them. So I'm not too sure that I liked Gene the last couple weeks trying to get into all this. By the way, Gene Lutke has finally come. Appreciated being here. He gave some nice words to me about taping these programs for FPAC at the last meeting, and I want to return the favor because Gene's done a wonderful job managing, directing the museum, helping with it, and really appreciate it. Okay. Where should I start? Well, here. We've got the President of the United States now. Actually, Bill Clinton was running for president back in 1992. And I think it's really important to know that a presidential candidate wants to shake hands and meet every potential voter that there is. And this is from the Weekly World News. And it's like thousands of people across the country saw this and go, wow. They were speechless, yes. And it tells inside somewhere, you know, that he looked at Bush and he looked at Perot and he settled on Bill Clinton. So it's nice to know that there was that endorsement. Of course, if you want to be president, you have to start somewhere. So somebody somewhere along the way came up with a baby bib to be first president. We've gone to Old Threshers several times and over Mount Pleasant, and it's amazing you can find little things there. Several years ago, I found these items, which were the George Bush and Michael Dukakis boxing puppets. And they actually kind of box each other if you put them on your hands. Okay, in no particular order. Inaugurations are fun. This is from the presidential inauguration of Dwight Eisenhower, I believe, in 1957. It's a, like a whiskey bottle kind of item. Of course, if you grew up with the Kennedys, you'll remember the record album about the first family by, I think it was Robert or Von Meter, kind of spoofing the first family. And that was always fun. I'm sure many of you sat around nightly, putting this on your turntable and just laughing your head off. Yes, I understand that. This was kind of interesting. It's a plate about the Republican National Convention in San Francisco in 1956. And to read it, it was held in California, in San Francisco. And on the back, it says, "The San Francisco meeting marks the first time in our nation's history that a Republican Party convention has been held in the West. It is significant that the occasion marks the centennial year of the first national convention of the party whose first presidential candidate was a Californian, John C. Fremont." So it makes it kind of neat. When you go to different national conventions where the presidents are formally nominated, that's a treasure trove for obtaining items. And I'm sure especially on the internet now and the different auction sites, after the different conventions that will be coming up, you'll start seeing all these items coming out to market. Of course, a nice thing coming in Iowa is being able to meet the different presidential candidates. This one was in 1996 with Alan Keyes. And everybody has bumper stickers. So it's always, oops, excuse me. It's always kind of nice to, when they come, say, to Fairfield or anywhere, be able to get their autograph. So we got that one for Alan Keyes. And in April, I believe, 1995, Lamar Alexander went down to Keosauqua. So I went down there, and they took a picture of Lamar Alexander afterwards playing the piano. And I happened to be in the picture that wound up being in, I believe it was the Burlington Hawkeye. So I had a reprint made of that and got his autograph. Told you about the boxing puppets for Bush and Dukakis. This is one for President Reagan, the same kind. For the Democratic National Convention back in 1968, they have these different ribbons that were available for the delegates and the alternates. And those are really valuable now. Not necessarily these, but they'll appreciate over the years. Buttons are fun. Buttons are what most people, when they collect political items, collect. We've got, I believe right now it's over 800 buttons in our collection. I didn't bring them all up. But these are some, I did one, these are the Democrats, some of what I have. And I tried to pick these with an Iowa flavor to them. Back in 1992, our Senator Tom Harkin ran for president. So we had some buttons with him, with the state of Iowa. Back in 1976, you had Carter Mondale running. You had the state of Iowa with Mondale. The current one is Bill Bradley, and I've got an Al Gore sticker at home. Forgot to bring that with me. San Francisco, 1964, the Democratic National Convention, or 1984, excuse me. First to spotlight Hart in Iowa. And the I in the Iowa is a piece of corn. You have the Iowa Democratic Presidential Conventions and Democratic Presidential Debate in 1984, and I believe that that debate was actually canceled. They produced the buttons, but at the last minute, I believe that they canceled the debate. So there was no debate, but they had the buttons for it. And just none of the above and whatnot. These are some of the Republican type buttons and ribbons that I have. This one's for the Republican National Convention in Iowa in San Francisco, 1956, which would be comparable to the plate that I have over there. You have an Iowa delegate to the National Convention, Lamar Alexander. Lamar Alexander was famous for his plaid shirt that he used to wear when he ran for governor of Tennessee. When he came to Iowa, he did the same thing. Didn't work very well, but he tried. And he created a book called The Little Plaid Book. Somehow presidential candidates like to write a lot of books. But anyway, he had the state of Iowa done up in plaid. This one is from the Iowa State Presidential Convention, April 17th, 1968. Compliments of Senator Roger Jepsen. Dole 96, the state of Iowa. So it's just all different kinds of Iowa themes that can be found out there. Last fall, a lot of people know Nell and Jean Egley. And before they left on their trip to Africa, we did a videotaping for FPAC about them, and she gave me this Ike tie from Mike Eisenhower. I thought that was nice. You have the different inaugural activities. These are some of the tickets that we got. This is from 1989 with the Bush, which was the American presidential inaugural year, the bicentennial of the presidency. So they did a lot of things with George to George and whatnot. This is from the inaugural dinner. And this is from 1981 with Ronald Reagan of the inaugural ball and some of those tickets. This is one of the sweatshirts, George to George, 200 years, 1789, 1989, with the American presidential inaugural. And on the back, I believe, if I can get it off, they had a listing of all the presidents when they're from George to George. Let's see. What a difference running for president and being president can make. These are convention hall admission tickets for General Dwight D. Eisenhower. This one is September 4th, 1952, Republican candidate for president. America's great commander speaks to the citizens and the youth on world peace and the future of our country at a tremendously important Republican meeting in the birthplace of American liberty and independence. And this is in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. 4 years later, he becomes president. 4 years later, he comes back to the same place. The President and Mrs. Dwight D. Eisenhower, our great president, beloved by America and respected by the world as the outstanding leader of the century. What a difference 4 years makes. This is a new bumper sticker for Alan Keyes, which I thought was interesting because it plays up on the internet of www.keys2000.org. It's showing up everywhere. And we had the future president down here. If you get a little bit bigger, you can be a young Republican and have the Republican team. Ross Perot, for whatever reasons, had a little ball. This is a play on George Bush's Read My Lips of broken promises. So you have Humpty Dumpty that sort of fell off and broke. We found this, I believe, at some shopping center, just some novelty store somewhere, and thought, we'll get that one. So we kind of enjoyed having that. Jimmy Carter, when he ran in 1980, they created this little ribbon. I guess you twirl it around or something. It doesn't work very well, which may be why he didn't get elected. I don't know. Sometimes you could read too much into these things. It's not very fashionable these days, but cigarettes were popular years ago for campaign items. This is George Bush for president in 1988, and Michael Dukakis in there. Of course, you need something to light it up with, so you have Dukakis and Bush matchbooks. And if you need a little bit of help, here's a pocket knife, and it says, "Don't blame me, I voted for Bush." This is an official political and other valuable information program from 1912, manufactured by Liggett and Myers Tobacco Company. So I think tobacco companies, especially back in the early years, did an awful lot of advertising and things trying to get people hooked. Of course, every president that's ever been elected, they get to be on a ruler. Every school child gets to be, have a presidential ruler. You can get different watches that are available. This one is a Bill Clinton watch. And if I remember correctly, if you look, and we'll pass it along, if you look, the hands run backwards on it. And the face on it, instead of 12, 1, 2, 3, it's 12, 1, 2, 3. So it sort of goes backwards.
And the significance of that?
Somebody didn't like Clinton. And here's one for George and Barbara Bush with their pictures on it. And of course, we live in Fairfield, and back in 1992, we had Dr. John Hagelin from the Natural Law Party that ran. So I've got a few items from that. These were items that were in the newspaper count. This is a Goldwater can. I remember as a child in 1964, because I was about 10 years old, and I can remember driving around in Washington, D.C., where I grew up at, and seeing these bumper stickers on the telephone poles, and I couldn't figure out what in the world it meant, because it said AUH2O. And it took a long time until I finally asked my parents or somebody, what does that mean? Oh, well, that's for Goldwater. Yeah. Berry Gold. Oops, wrong one. Berry Goldwater. And then Lyndon Johnson here. Unfortunately, his hat's gotten broken over the years, but still has his pin. We did bring some satire items with us. We tried to clean it up a little bit. We have others that are worse, but if we offend you, I'm sorry, but that's the name of the game. This is Bush with quail in his pocket. And it was funny because after we bought this, we saw an interview with Gary Trudeau, who was the creator of Doonesbury, and they had like a Newsweek story about him, and on a shelf behind his desk, he had this very item. So I thought, well, we're in good company. This is Jimmy Carter. Carter is a walking peanut. And it does work. This is Michael Dukakis. You can, somehow I think he stretches his hands, and you can put it like on a telephone cord or a telephone line or something like that. If you don't have enough keychains in your life, you could have a Ronald Reagan keychain. These are kind of fun down here. I'm not sure if the camera can get to them. Bill Clinton, our president, has had a few troubles over the years. Somebody came up with these nesting dolls with Bill Clinton is the big one. The next one,
Monica.
that's okay, is Monica Lewinsky. Next to that is Paula Jones. Next to that is Jennifer Flowers. And last and smallest is Hillary. We have some other items, but we decided, yeah, we're not going to bring those with us. This is mixed company and it wouldn't be appropriate. This is a statue, or just kind of a little figurine that we got of Hillary Clinton and Socks the cat. Which is kind of interesting because many people, school kids and whatnot, always write to the President of the United States, we want your picture and all this, and you'll get the President's picture and the First Lady's picture, and maybe the Vice President, and so on. Well, after Bill Clinton became president, people were infatuated with Socks the cat. Forget about the President, forget about the First Lady, forget about the White House, forget about history. We want Socks the cat. So they came out with a picture of Socks the cat with a little paw print. Now I would imagine that if you write to them now, you could probably get a picture of Buddy, who's the presidential dog. cigars, bubble gum, or whatever, of Reagan is right and right for Fritz, Fritz Mondale, Walter Mondale, when they were running. So a little play on Ronald Reagan being on the right of the political spectrum, and right for Fritz. And we've got our little fan of the first family rebuilding America. With the nesting dolls, as much as I hate to say it, scandal is absolutely wonderful for political collections. I mean, as much as I would like to have a nice, morally upright person to be President of the United States, as a collector, I absolutely love having somebody who goes off the beaten road, because you get wonderful collections within reason. Bonnie got these when she worked on Capitol Hill in the 1970s. And these are presidential pens. This is one from Gerald Ford, and it had his printed signature. A lot of times when they would sign letters and things like that, bill signings and whatnot, proclamations, they would use a pen. And early on they figured out, if we use one pen for one letter, for each letter of the name, we would have more pens to give out and curry more favors, so they would do that. And here's one for Richard Nixon that Bonnie obtained, and this one is actually signed by Richard Nixon on it. So we enjoy that one. And it was funny, we were watching a few weeks ago the new TV show called The West Wing on NBC. And if any of you have ever had a chance to watch that, it's a wonderful show. And they were doing one episode about the bill signing, I believe, and they came up with, they had 13 letters, but they needed 15 pens, or there was some difference in there, and they're all scratching their heads as to how to work it out, and I think he wound up dotting another I or something to use it. This is the Iowa GOP 1988 First in the Nation Caucus, one of the mugs, and they had the printed signatures of all the candidates on it. Bonnie and I, in 1987, went to the Midwest Leadership Conference up in Des Moines. And it was one of the few times that they had held it in an area where we could reasonably go. And at that point, George Bush was running, and Bob Dole, and all these others. So we went up there, and we had a field day trying to get everybody's autograph. And we had two programs, and we'd go around and we'd try and kind of follow the spotlight, follow the TV lights, and we'd, gravitate to that, and we'd get them to sign it. And remember, we had one, who was it that signed? I think it was Al Haig had signed it or something first, or we had gotten Pat Robertson, I guess it was, and it was real great. And then we saw Bob Dole, Senator Dole, and we go up to him and, can we have your autograph? And he was all fine. And then he saw Pat Robertson's name, and he did it, but grudgingly. So it was kind of fun to catch that. This is from the inauguration of George Bush in 1989, one of their mugs that they had. And it's got a signature in gold in the back. Air Force One. When the President of the United States gets to travel outside of the White House, he has to go usually by plane. This is a replica of Air Force One, and I brought it because it's made by Ertl Company, which is up in Dyersville, Iowa. And I thought that was kind of an interesting tie-in, and it gives a history of the presidential airliner on the back. Whatnot. We've got a couple of those. And this one we bought from the Smithsonian Institution. This one came out, and it's a scale model of the new Air Force One. It's really quite a nice thing. Bonnie and I saw it land up in the Quad Cities back in 1983. We happened to be up there for something else and just happened to read in the newspaper that President Clinton was coming to the Quad Cities. That time Iowa was having the big floods and everything. So he was going up there to do an inspection. I was kind of like, okay, let's go and watch Air Force One land. I'm not sure that she'll ever forgive me trying to go race from one end of the airport to the other and back again, trying to get Air Force One. I wound up taking pictures of it. Usually I take wonderful pictures. The 2 pictures of Air Force One, just as it's touching the runway, my finger was right in the lens. I was absolutely frustrated with myself, but it was kind of really neat. Back in 1987, just as an aside, when Bonnie and I had invited Vice President Bush to come to Fairfield for the Jefferson County dinner, well, he was coming on Air Force Two, which was the vice presidential plane, and it landed in Ottumwa because they needed the longer runway. Well, when it landed, one of the things that we noticed was its number on the back. It was literally the same plane that was used for John F. Kennedy to bring his body back from Dallas to Washington, D.C. It was the same plane that was used by Richard Nixon to go to China. You know, all of that. It's since been retired, and so it was the plane before this. But that plane was retired just a couple years ago from active service, and it's now in an Air Force museum in Dayton, Ohio. And I think one of these days we're going to get over there to see it. I guess you can take public tours of it now. One of the fun things is to be able to collect political figurines of the different presidents, and this is one of the President Clinton and one of Hillary. It's called Big Heads. At home, we've got a couple caricatures of Bush and Reagan with really big heads. I mean, they're not obscene or anything like that, but I mean, you know, they're oversized.
What's this Humpty Dumpty in the golf ball?
Now, this one was George Bush, representation of George Bush, Read My Lips, when he had the broken promise that he had made at the National Convention of no new taxes. Read my lips, or read my lips, no new taxes. And so somebody decided, you know, it's kind of like Humpty Dumpty, a little broken promise there. And this was by Ross Perot, just a little button. Several years ago, people think of the White House of having all of these modern conveniences and whatnot, and it's really not true. Up until about 5 or 6 years ago, their phone system in the White House was very low tech. I mean, not quite rotary dial, but pretty close to it. And it's a real problem for those government officials to try and deal with other governments and within themselves as technology changes. So they decided to upgrade their telephone system. Well, you got to do something with the old telephones, so that went to the General Services Administration, which kind of takes care of government equipment and things like that. Now, this is a deep, dark secret, but somebody in the government screwed up. I know that this is a shock to you, but somebody made a mistake. And some items were put up for auction, including these White House telephones. And there were about 24 of them that were put up for auction. And once the government found out about it, they tried to stop it because the political dealers in Washington, D.C. found out about it. Nobody out in the rest of the country would have ever known anything about it, but you had these collectible dealers in Washington, and somebody tipped them off. They found out about it, they went, they bid, The government couldn't stop the auction. About a month later, they came up on this American Political Items Collectors newsletter. I wasn't a member, but I had their newsletter, saw it, and I bought it. It's like, I can't resist that opportunity. So I bought it in the fall. I think this was in 95 or 96. And I gave it to Bonnie for Christmas. And I had more fun coming up with different clues for her Christmas present. But this one, and it really works. I mean, if we went over and we plugged it into a line cord, I mean, it works. But it's like everything else, the technology has changed where, it wasn't appropriate. But it does tell staff advance, press advance, office advance, WHCA office, which is the White House Communications Agency, and radio room and whatnot. But at the bottom, they have a little emblem of the White House. It's down there. I thought that was kind of neat. So you can look at that later. I'll move the space alien back here so you can look at it after a while. License plates are really fun. This one is from the 1969 Nixon inauguration. Now, after Bonnie and I had Vice President Bush come to Fairfield, that was on October 23rd, 1987. Well, we had gotten invitations to the inauguration, but we couldn't go, so we had to buy as many souvenirs as we could. They came out with souvenir license plates, so we came out with this one, where we ordered 10/23/87 for October 23rd. So that was kind of fun. This is a window decal for LBJ, Lyndon Johnson, in 1964. The Borax Company came out in 1972 for a centennial, 1972 set of reproduction campaign buttons. Everything. And those you have to be aware of because those aren't valuable. I mean, they're just reproductions and it gets kind of tricky. This is an inaugural plate of Ronald Reagan and George Bush that we had purchased. And I believe these are two presidential guides from 1960 and 1964. This one is from the Kool Tobacco Company, and this one is also by Kool. President Bush didn't get much respect when he was president sometimes, and when you go to the different shopping malls, there's one, it's called Spencer Gifts, and they come out with wonderful satire items. They don't have much respect for anybody. And they came out with this bushwhacker. I thought about blowing it up. I actually blew it up one time and I had a heck of a time de-inflating it to get it back in the box. So for this purpose, I didn't inflate it. But this is what a bushwhacker looks like. You could inflate it and be able to punch it. And it's got no new taxes, crossed out ideas, whatnot. Bushwhacker, like having a real politician of your very own. Watch him wobble, watch him waffle, to the left, to the right, then back to the middle where he started. He moves all over the place, then winds up back on his feet, having accomplished absolutely nothing. And he's got different things. So that's kind of fun. Back in 1992, when President Clinton and Vice President Gore were campaigning, they came to Burlington, Iowa, and went around the rest of the country. They did something that was very unusual. They got in a bus and they traveled the country. And it was tremendously effective going out and meeting people and gathering crowds. And this was one of the inaugural souvenirs of the bus. In 1996, when President Clinton and Senator Dole were running against each other, somebody came up with these little figureheads of Dole and Clinton. And we've got the different t-shirts up here. This one is from Saturday Night Live. It's a parody from that show where they used to say, President Bush used to say, "Wouldn't be prudent," and that was a parody of that. The inauguration of President George Bush, 1989, a sweatshirt. And Bill Clinton. This is a cap. I never ever wear a cap in my life, but that's one of the Clinton inaugural caps. So it's actually on record that I wore one. This is Socks the cat. Socks goes to Washington. Back several years ago, we were eating over at Hardee's, and they put this poster up on the wall. And after a while, we kept going over and saying, "Can we have that when you get it down?" So eventually, we ate there enough, and they gave it to us. And it's Hardee's wins in a landslide over KFC, with a picture of the White House. Back in the mid-'60s, Lyndon Johnson had a clock. Actually, that was kind of, do have one interesting story. Everybody has their own personal brush with history once in a while. And in November '63, for Thanksgiving, President Kennedy was scheduled to actually go to our church, where I went to church at, Mount Vernon Place Methodist Church, for the Thanksgiving service. Well, he was shot that Friday, and the Friday before, and they had the funeral and all that stuff. Well, the next, I believe it was Wednesday or Thursday, I believe, we had Thanksgiving service at our church, and lo and behold, President Johnson kept the appointment, and it was actually his first appearance. Well, what was significant for me was my parents and I and my sister go there, go to the church, and we enter through the back, and it's a large church. 3 different sections, middle section there. The ushers take us down to the 5th row from the front, lead me in, my sister in, my mother, my father. It's fine. And we sit there and all. A few minutes before the service is about to begin, off from the front, here comes the presidential entourage. Lady Bird Johnson, President Johnson, children. They all come down, and guess which row they sat in? Secret Service, I'm here, Secret Service agent, Lady Bird Johnson, President Johnson. Well, we kept, couldn't really send something down for his autograph, it didn't quite seem appropriate. But we did keep looking over, and we discovered nobody had given him a church bulletin. So after a little bit, my mother whispered over to the Secret Service agent, they like a program? Yeah. So we slipped our program down there. But I still remember the Secret Service agent, they have to identify themselves with little pins to each other. And I remember him, flipping his collar, showing me his ID. And the other thing that I do remember is we had this huge balcony in our church. And I can remember looking back, and there was a submachine gun up in there. 5 days after his presidential assassination, they weren't taking any risks. So that was kind of, I would love to be able to go back and find in the White House photo archives if they ever took a picture, because you would see this little blonde-haired little boy, in there. And we have the stand up figures of the presidents and first ladies.
You
I
were
think-
gonna play music.
Yeah. Nope. At some point, you can do that afterwards. I think I'll close with, this is a ward map that I obtained in 1996 when we did the program for the Art Association. And I went through looking for different ties of the presidents to Fairfield in Jefferson County. And we discovered that this is the town square. And originally, I believe, if I can find my piece of information at the bottom, is it in the city of Fairfield, the original central block called the Public Square. I'm not sure if it was actually what is now the current square. I think we were actually a block south or something, a block or two, but somewhere around there, was enclosed by 4 streets. They were named for presidents. The one on the east, Washington, the one on the west, Jefferson, one on the north, Madison, the one on the south, Monroe. And that must have been in the early days, and then they must have changed the streets because that's not the current configuration of the streets, but that's what it was originally done. Well, then they named the streets south of Fairfield after presidents, and we now have 14 streets. When I originally did this, I actually counted one of Wilson Street, Wilson Boulevard, but I've come to understand now that that didn't have anything to do with either President Wilson or James F. Wilson, who was the senator from Iowa, or from Fairfield. It was just some family that lived on that street, and from what I believe Lee Gobble told me, it was just named kind of after that family, but it didn't have any political connection. So I had to scratch that one out. But in the old spirit of things go around that come around, we do have a new street now called Lincoln Avenue. Lincoln Avenue down here that's plotted. It's not actually there, but it's sort of there. So that brings us back to our 14 streets named after presidents. Now, of course, we're named after Thomas Jefferson, in Jefferson County. And I just went around and did different stories about the presidents. Of course, we had Roosevelt School, which is now the aquatic center, or not the aquatic center, but the Park and Rec building. I believe that was named after Teddy Roosevelt at that time. Logan Apartments was originally a school that was named after John Logan, who in the mid-1800s, along with James Blaine, ran for vice president. Blaine ran for president against Harrison. And I guess Logan came to Fairfield or something, or had some kind of Fairfield ties, and they named the school after Logan. Actually, I've got a campaign poster from, I believe, 1884 or 88 of the Blaine-Logan campaign, the Republican convention, whatnot. I was going to bring it, but it's so brittle, it's kind of like, unless I bring it and leave it, I didn't want to risk transporting it because it's very brittle. But I found that over in Ottumwa one time. We have Lincoln School, named after Lincoln. We have Washington School, named after Washington. I like this saying by Will Rogers: "There's no trick to being a humorist when you have the whole government working for you." Let's see. We've never had, I guess until Bill Clinton, actually now, presidents who were only children, or were only children, none. I think, Bill had his brother. So we're still, everybody had a sibling. Presidents who saw military action in World War I were Harry S. Truman and Dwight Eisenhower. And just lots of different sayings. Did anybody bring any memorabilia of their own to share with us?
I didn't think to bring it, but I have a political badge from 1895 that came out of an old book I bought. It's a cloth badge, and I can't remember the name of the party, but Ben Taylor did some research on it, and he said it was a woman's prohibition party that only lasted a few years.
Yeah, it could have been. Yeah, that's,
I've got a Hoover Curtis and I forgot to bring it.
oh,
Is there any way you can tell the difference between a reproduced button and
a lot of
political button?
yeah, the question was how to tell the difference between a reproduction button and a legitimate button. Well, that's one of the big issues that this American Political Item Collectors group had with, because a lot of people were creating buttons, companies were creating them, passing them off as real ones, or at least not explaining that it's a reproduction and people were getting them. Then they'd want wildly inflated prices upon resale. So I believe it was in 1972, the collectors group got President Nixon to sign into federal law. I've got it here somewhere, where basically it's an act which requires specific lettering in specific sizes to be written on the buttons if it is a reproduction. It has to clearly state that it's a reproduction, when it was created, so on and so forth. But it's not a big of a problem now as what it was back in the 60s and 70s. And basically they tried to nip it in the bud. But they do have a problem with vendors. We've been to some of the different campaigns where, especially since the 1960s, television is much more used by the candidates than anything else. So if you've ever tried to collect a political button from modern presidential campaigns, it can be really tough. So to fill the void, you have a lot of vendors, which are basically either political dealers or button companies that create their own buttons, such as these types. This one with Tom Harkin, I'm very frustrated because I can't find it at home. But this one, there's actually more of these. This Brown Button Company, I believe it was in Boston, created a whole set of Democratic and Republican candidate buttons with pictures, with the state of Iowa and with the United States outline for the 1992 campaign. And I bought 2 sets of both kinds, and I can't find them. They're somewhere in my closet, but I can't find them. But that's one of the major problems that you have now, because it's not an officially candidate-sanctioned button. And if you think long and hard about how many companies could be out there creating different buttons, like this one is blue and white, well, it doesn't take too much, figuring of, okay, what if you did white on red, red on white, blue on white, white on red, or white on blue, green and white, all different color combinations, flipping the colors around, flipping the names, all this stuff. So just on this one style, you could have 25, 30, 50 variations, sell them for 50 cents or $1 a piece, and there's some collector out there that wants all of them because they want a complete collection. So there's a lot of money that can be made, but that was one of the problems that they had, of people, different vendors trying to do that, and they weren't coming from the candidates or the campaigns.
Richard, is there any licensing fee whatsoever for any of this, the caricatures or the Air Force One or any of that, or is it just fair game for all the people? all the
Pretty much, I
purposes
think it's fair game. I think once you sign the dotted line that you're running for office, I mean, Betty probably knows as much as anything.
Even Air
Pretty
Force
much
One.
your private life, you know, whatever is fair game.
Even Air Force One.
Yeah, I imagine that this one came from the Smithsonian Institution and specially crafted, so I'm sure that they work with, you know, the government on it. I mean, it was in their best interest to create the best possible thing, but things like a peanut with Carter's thing, somehow I don't think that Jimmy Carter gave us approval on it, but
Don't they sell these at the Hoover Library, these replicas?
mhm.
That's what I
Yeah.
thought.
This is the original.
Yeah.
This isn't the modern, I mean, that's the thing too, that you have to kind of watch is, you know, when something comes out the first time that a president becomes president or is running, and then years later it goes into the reissues and everything. There's different presidential libraries around the country now. We've got the Hoover Library up in West Branch, and you can purchase a lot of things up there, but it's not, that stuff really won't become valuable, but you know, it's kind of fun.
Do you limit your collecting to presidential completely?
I wish. Question was, do we limit our collecting? Yeah. Bottom line though, quite frankly, since we did the display in '96, I've collected virtually nothing since for political things. It just sort of went out. That's where it was kind of fun to get back into all this for this program, but no, we just kind of collect what we like and wish we could win Powerball and get a bigger house. And
It seems like your collecting started with Ike primarily, as far as your older things. Do you have things
no,
older
actually,
than
I
that?
think for Bonnie and me, probably started more with Kennedy and Johnson going up. And I mean, the Ike tie, that was just given to me as a gift, but I mean, Ike was kind of before my time. I was born then, but pretty much the 1960s. In 1968, I can remember seeing Hubert Humphrey at the shopping mall, just a mile or so from where I lived. And he came on a campaign visit, and they had buttons, so we'd get buttons, things like that, and then Nixon and McGovern and all that. But the really good collectible things, you pretty much have to go to either, you know, antique dealers, collectible dealers, to be able to get that kind of stuff. Any questions or anything? Thank you for the program.
Well, I've been informed that I'm supposed to close up, so thank you, Richard, for this very thorough presentation. You've got a lot of interesting stuff here, and a lot of this is the kind of stuff that just gets thrown away, so it's always good to have a few collectors out there that keep the ball rolling for history in the future. So thank you again for joining us here at the museum.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Richard,
Okay.
I received
Sit there and
supposedly.
he says, did anybody bring
Why
anything?
don't you go ahead and just stop it?
A couple of things I'd love to have brought.
Oh, well.
Technical break here. I've got to go over and shut the